London is better off than it was in 2012, apparently, according to the people who collect such numbers. And encouragingly, we have less poverty than 10 years ago. Statistics collected for the London Poverty Profile, which is compiled by a charity called the Trust for London, who I recommend you want to go and check out if you're interested in this area. They found that 27% of Londoners are classed as being in poverty in 2017, and it was 29% in 2007. So 10 years on, poverty is dropping a little. But that doesn't mean we're living in a city that is financially fair, or that there are not huge numbers of people still who the Archbishop mentioned were financially vulnerable. The first statistics I want to just highlight is that actually in-work poverty is becoming a major problem in London. Employment rates are at their peak, and yet 58% of Londoners in poverty are in working households. Only 8% of Londoners claim out-of-work benefits, and yet poverty is still here. So it's very clear that you're more likely to be in poverty if you're in a working household. Being in work does not mean financial health. Poorly paid jobs, insecure work, 0 hours mean people are bringing in a wage and yet they are still struggling. We're going to hear later from stories of a church that's responded to that very issue, and I'm looking forward to hearing that from Tim later on. Along comes is the issue of housing. That's another big change in the last 5 years. The change in tenure. There's been a massive rise in those in poverty living in private rented accommodation. This is often insecure and is often the most expensive way to keep a roof over your head. And yet those in poverty are more likely to live in private rented now than they were 5 or 10 years ago. That's obviously to do with the fact that private rented there's a massive lack of truly affordable housing. And with that comes another trend that poverty is moving to the outskirts. It's no longer true that the picture of poverty in London we often have, concentrated only on the inner deprived estates, is the real picture. That is still an issue, and obviously the tragedy at Grenfell shows just how pocketed deprivation and poor living standards can be in our city boroughs. It's not that inner city poverty has gone away, it's just that some of it has moved outwards. In the outer boroughs, they're more likely to house the poor. And this is, again, alongside the shift in private rented accommodation, which is obviously cheaper in the outer boroughs. So those living in the outer boroughs are just as likely to be living alongside the poor as those in the inner city. And finally, the final statistic I want to highlight is the level of precariousness of people's finances. As Bishop Graham already mentioned, the lack of layer above which you can stand an income shock is very small. The Money Advice Service suggests that 4 in 10 adults in London don't even have £100 in savings. So an unexpected cost, an illness, a relationship breakdown, a housing problem can throw people into chaos. There are many people in financial crisis, but there are many more under the surface, and that financial crisis could hit at any time. The use of credit is rising, worryingly to 2008 levels, but the evidence suggests this time round the credit is being used to pay everyday bills, putting rent on credit cards and taking out loans for essential items. So they're just a few high-level statistics about what's going on in London at the moment, painting the picture. 5 years on, this is where we are. But as Bishop Graham said, this needs to be a problem that's really heard about in terms of relationships. So I'm delighted that I can welcome Bruce Connell, who's going to come and talk to us a little bit about his work. Bruce runs the brilliant Crosslight Debt Advice charity that partners with churches to offer free debt advice and money advice to people who are financially excluded. And they run a debt advice centre right here at St Paul's Hammersmith. So I'm delighted that he can be here with us.
Thank you very much indeed. It's fantastic to be with you this evening. What Alison didn't say is that I'm a bit of an interloper. I wasn't on the original billing. You were due to have somebody much more important than me talk about the vision for the next 5 years, which got me thinking as to what my vision is for the next 5 years and how we as an organisation and the churches that support us can respond to what's been happening in our economy and in our communities. I started the charity that I work for, Crosslight Advice, some 8 years ago now. And right at the outset, our vision was for the work that we do to become a natural extension of the mission of the church, not some kind of add-on, some kind of specialist organisation camped out in a secret corner, but an integral part of the beating heart of a community-focused church, as much part of its mission as the Sunday services. And frankly, my vision hasn't changed from 8 years ago. Indeed, if anything, as we start to see even more sharply than before the fragmentation of our society into the haves and the have-nothing, as we witness rates of loneliness and isolation like never before, a vision that puts the church right at the centre of the solution to society's problems seems to me more important than ever. So when those in our communities are facing difficulty, when they're being ripped off by the financial system, when they're struggling with debt or addictions or homelessness or isolation or any of the many difficulties so many of us face, and which are highlighted in the report that Alison referred to, my fervent wish is for the church to be known as the first port of call. When anyone in our communities think to themselves, where can I go for help? Where can I go for mercy and justice? I want their first thought to be our local church. When they tell their friends, I don't want their friends to look at them in complete surprise. Where you going? Where? Your local church? For debt advice? I want them to say, of course you are. That's where I was last week. Why? Because we are community. Because those who come through our doors will know that they are loved, not just by the God who created them, but by us too. And that they'll know that we will walk beside them to the best of our ability for as long as it takes. Visions and 5-year plans are fantastic things. They give us the inspiration to move forward and a framework in which to do it. But they can, if we're honest, also be quite daunting. With so many wrongs to right, how can we ever really make a change? And as vital as the big picture is, I think at times it's also helpful to focus on the little pictures. Because behind these statistics are, of course, real people, real individuals, real lives, real starfish on the beach. You know the story, I'm sure, of the little boy who was walking along a beach covered in tens of thousands of starfish washed up after a storm. And as he walks along, he carefully picks one up and throws it back to safety, one at a time. And whilst he's doing this, a man approaches him and tells him of the futility of what he's doing. It's pointless. Look at them, there are thousands. What difference can you possibly make? And as the boy picks up another starfish and puts it back into the sea, he says, it's made a difference to that one. So how can we change the world? Sometimes it's one starfish at a time. Yes, absolutely, we are called to fight the big injustices. Some of the biggest positive changes in our country over the centuries have been the result of the church mobilising in God's name. But doing justice doesn't always have to be big. Sometimes the most effective actions we can take are individual and local. At Crosslight, we have the great privilege of meeting many different people from all walks of life who entrust us with their situations. And we devote huge amounts of time and effort trying to help them resolve their difficulties. We have databases and policy manuals and complicated rules and compliance criteria, and we train our volunteers to be able to know the difference between an outright possession order and a suspended possession order, and we make sure that we give advice and reassurance when utilities are about to be cut off or benefits stop or courts become involved, and we add our voice wherever possible to those seeking reform of lending practices and campaigning to change the law on bailiffs. In essence, we work very hard to make sure that we're able to provide the best quality advice that we can. But time and again, when I review our files and hear feedback from clients and advisors, it's one thing that stands out above all else. The occasions where we're able to see lives truly transformed are the occasions when we've been able to walk alongside somebody and join them in the fight. It's when the sheer bloody-mindedness of our advisors means that they didn't give up. When they held onto somebody's hand and said, "I'm standing with you." The first advice centre we opened back in 2010 was based down the road in the next door borough of Kensington and Chelsea, just around the corner from all of the museums and surrounded by beautiful stucco-fronted Chelsea mansions. We have a Lamborghini and a Maserati garage within 2 minutes of our office. A very incongruous place, you might think, for an organisation dedicated to support those suffering financially. And yet, what the horrific events of June last year at Grenfell Tower laid bare is the truth in this great international city of ours. There are large parts of our communities that have been left behind. In between the gleaming new luxury apartments are the voiceless, those on zero-hour contracts, those struggling with the Kafkaesque idiosyncrasies of the benefit system, or struggling to access mental health support. And frankly, it's about time that their voices were heard. Voices like Habiba, a single mum with 2 young children, living in a single room just up the road from here. Unable to afford childcare, she nevertheless works part-time as a chef to support her family. Originally from Egypt, she emigrated to London 12 years ago, and her 10-year-old son was born here. But about a year ago, without warning, her visa status was changed, suddenly prohibiting her from claiming any kind of benefit. She and her family were suddenly denied healthcare, or support with her rent, or tax credits to support her children. And when she came to see us, she built up round about £11,000 worth of rent arrears and was at the point of being evicted. She told us that she regularly went without food so that her children could eat. And with the stress, she developed a speech impediment. She told us, "One morning I woke up and my tongue was stuck. Words just wouldn't come out. My children were crying." She had become literally voiceless. And even when she could speak, no one was listening. Apart from her local church, actually here at St Paul's. And our advisors were able to get to work, getting the Home Office to reverse its decision, challenging and stopping the eviction and ensuring that her benefits were restored. Small justice, perhaps, but not to Habiba. "I felt that I was at sea and just about to drown. You rescued me," she wrote. Or voices like David, who leaves his home in Shepherd's Bush at 3:30 each morning for the 2-hour journey by night bus to Heathrow Airport, where he works as a cargo handler. David struggles with reading and writing, and a few years ago became the victim of a sophisticated mortgage and identity fraud, which left him penniless and owing more than £200,000. Unable to afford to visit his family, his young children grew up without him. And in spite of a crime having been committed, no one was listening. But our advisors were able to come alongside him. And through their tireless detective work, the full extent of the property scam was uncovered. David was not the only victim, and eventually we were able to get his debts written off. These people and people like them mustn't just be statistics. These are our neighbours. And when I think of injustice, these are the faces that I see. But we're not anything special. There's nothing unique about our volunteers. There's no reason at all why each of us can't do the same thing. So what do I want to see for the next 5 years? I see the church absolutely getting involved in campaigning. I think we need to confidently shine a light on the big issues affecting our communities. But I think we also have to be prepared to be good neighbours, to be advocates for and within our communities, to take our neighbours by the hand and not let go. And perhaps by being advocates in our communities, we'll ensure that we have the credibility to challenge some of the big injustices as well. When we truly walk alongside our neighbours, we'll be able to uncover some of the big issues being faced and work with them to ensure that their voices are heard. Because God forbid this becomes about them and us. This is us and us. I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but these people aren't other, are they? Of course not. They are our community, our neighbours, our brothers and sisters. They are us, we are them. Each of us made in the image of God, each loved by God, and when we work for justice for one, I think we work for justice for all, which is why it's so fantastic to be at an event like this and hear about the incredible work so many of you are doing, and why I'm already looking forward to the same event in 5 years' time, when we'll be able to celebrate again the work that God has done through all of us in our local communities.